Hiring outsourced callers, strategies that work. Why B2B teams are hiring outsourced callers again. Building a calling-heavy SDR function in-house is expensive, slow, and fragile. Between recruiting, ramp time, tooling, and churn, a simple outbound motion can turn into a six-figure operating commitment before you see consistent pipeline. That's why more teams are turning to sales outsourcing and building an outsourced sales team that can start producing without adding headcount. This shift is mainstream now, not experimental. 59% of companies outsource at least some part of lead generation. The market is also growing fast. Outsourced B2B lead generation services were valued at $2.66 billion in 2024 and are projected to reach $7.33 billion by 2033, about 11.9% CAGR. The takeaway is simple. The external SDR model is becoming a default option, especially for teams that need predictable meetings and faster time to pipeline. The catch is that outsourced callers only work when you manage them like part of your revenue team, not like a black box vendor. When you approach an SDR agency as a strategic extension of your playbook, clear ICP, clear qualification, real coaching, and real reporting, outsourcing becomes a reliable growth channel. When you treat it like telemarketing, you'll get telemarketing results. Cold calling in 2025. It still works, but targeting matters more. Cold calling isn't dead in B2B, it's just less forgiving. HubSpot reports 68% of sales pros work at organizations that still use cold calling in some capacity, which is why cold calling services remain a core part of many outbound programs. If your buyers still answer calls or return them, you can safely outsource the channel, provided your program is built around quality, not just activity. At the same time, the spray and pray era is over. Cognism's research shows average dial-to-meeting success fell from 4.82% in 2024 to 2.3% in 2025, which means you don't fix performance by demanding more dials. You fix it by tightening your ICP, improving data quality, and making your callers more credible in the first 15 seconds. The upside is that buyers still accept proactive outreach when it's relevant. Rain Group data summarized by Zippia indicates about 82% of buyers have agreed to a meeting after cold outreach, including cold calls, which is exactly why a well-run cold calling agency can still drive high-value conversations. The goal isn't to grind calls. It's to create confident, well-timed interruptions that earn a next step. Build versus buy. The unit economics that decide the strategy. If you're comparing higher SDRs versus higher outsourced callers, you're really comparing speed, overhead, and risk. A 2025 cost analysis estimates a fully loaded in-house SDR costs roughly $9,800 to $14,200 per month, with a typical rep around $12,010. At steady state, that model often lands near $1,000 per held meeting, before you factor in ramp, management time, and attrition. Outsourcing can compress those costs because you're not rebuilding the entire system, hiring, tooling, coaching, QA, list-building services, and reporting from scratch. In many programs, outsourcing reduces total costs by 40 to 60% compared to an equivalent internal build. And strong outsourced models often land in the $375 to $500 cost per held meeting range. The point isn't that outsourced is always cheaper, it's that it's usually more predictable. Here's the simplest way to frame it for RevOps. Compare steady-state costs, then stress test the ramp and churn assumptions. If your SDR tenure averages 14 months, you're constantly paying ramp tax, and you'll feel it in your cost per opportunity even when meetings look fine on paper. How to pick outsourced callers without wasting a quarter. The most common failure mode is hiring the cheapest offshore call center, handing them a script, and hoping volume solves everything. That approach usually burns your best data, damages your brand, and convinces leadership that outsourced callers don't work. Instead, look for an SDR agency or outbound sales agency that specializes in B2B sales development, can show relevant call recordings, and is comfortable debating ICP and qualification, not just promising dial counts. We recommend buying outcomes, not hours. If you pay for seats without tight accountability, you'll get activity theater, lots of dials, thin conversations, and low-quality meetings. Strong cold calling companies will align to outcome-oriented pricing, or at least outcome-oriented SLAs, like cost per held meeting, with clear definitions for what qualified means by segment and what disqualifies an account immediately. Transparency is non-negotiable because it determines how fast you can fix problems. Require visibility into lists, scripts, disposition codes, weekly reporting, and call recordings, and insist they can operate inside your CRM or a synced workspace so attribution is real. If a provider won't share recordings, won't explain data sources, or won't show how they coach callers, you're not hiring a partner, you're buying a black box. Outsourced callers work when you treat them like a pod on your team. Shared playbooks, shared metrics, and shared accountability for held meetings and pipeline. The operating model. Run outsourced callers like an internal SDR pod. The secret to making a cold calling team perform is onboarding and context. Even if callers aren't closing deals, they still represent your brand and need to handle objections, basic product questions, and competitor comparisons without sounding like telemarketing. Treat training like you would for a new internal SDR. Positioning, personas, live call shadowing, objection handling, and a tight handoff process to AEs. Start with a data and ICP sprint before anyone touches the phone. One study cited by Task Virtual found about 50% of reps' time is spent searching for prospects rather than selling. That's exactly what good sales outsourcing should remove. When list building and prioritization are handled well, callers spend more time in real conversations, and your cost per meeting improves faster than any new opener ever will. At SalesHive, we've seen the difference between vendor management and pod leadership across thousands of outbound programs since 2016. The best results come from weekly call reviews, fast messaging experiments, and tight feedback loops between callers, AEs, and RevOps. Whether you're using a cold email agency to warm accounts or a cold calling agency to create live conversations, the operating cadence is what turns outsourced effort into owned pipeline. Measurement that protects quality and keeps AEs bought in. If you measure success on raw dials, you'll get dials, often at the expense of targeting and qualification. The better approach is to track the full funnel from outreach to revenue outcomes, then use that data to coach. Where are we losing people and why? This is also how you avoid the classic problem of booked meetings that never hold, which quietly destroys trust between AEs and your outsourced sales team. Anchor incentives to held meetings and pipeline, not just booked calls. If qualified isn't defined, you'll get calendar clutter. If qualified is defined but never audited, you'll still get calendar clutter. We recommend requiring structured notes, role, pain, current approach, timing, and disqualifiers before a meeting counts, and reviewing recordings weekly until the quality bar is stable. To make reporting concrete, build a simple scoreboard your vendor can't hide from. When you can see dials, connects, meaningful conversations, booked meetings, held meetings, and opportunities in one place, you'll know whether the constraint is data, messaging, caller skill, or offer. That clarity is what separates a scalable B2B sales agency partnership from a revolving door of vendors. Multi-channel first. Make calls warmer with email and LinkedIn touches. Calls perform better when they're part of a coordinated sequence. Instead of treating calls as a standalone tactic, pair them with email and LinkedIn touches so the first live conversation feels familiar. In practice, that means your caller references a recent email, a relevant trigger, or a LinkedIn interaction in the first sentence. Instant credibility with no extra minutes added to the day. This is where combining a cold email agency motion with B2B cold calling can materially improve outcomes. When the inbox touch creates recognition, the call becomes a follow-up instead of a cold interruption, and connect rates typically rise. The net effect is fewer wasted dials and more real conversations, critical in a world where average dial-to-meeting success is only 2.3% for undifferentiated outreach. If your provider can't run multi-channel or coordinate tightly with your team that does, you're leaving performance on the table. Your outsourced callers should know which email went out, what the CTA was, and what the prospect did afterward. Then tailor the call around that context. That's how modern B2B cold calling services avoid sounding robotic and start sounding consultative. A practical 90-day pilot plan to launch and scale. The cleanest way to start is a 90-day pilot with clear SLAs and a clear exit ramp. Choose one segment, one offer, and a tight ICP. Then commit to a weekly operating cadence, call review, list review, and messaging updates. Most credible providers can launch in 2 to 4 weeks, but you should still expect a tuning period in days 30 to 60 as you learn what resonates. Decide upfront what good looks like: held meetings, show rate, and early opportunity creation, not just booked calls. Make sure your CRM is the source of truth so you can measure what the outsourced motion actually produces downstream. If you can't see outcomes in your pipeline dashboards, you're guessing. And guessing is how teams churn through cold calling services without ever fixing the root issue. When the pilot works, scaling is mostly about maintaining quality while adding volume. Add capacity in small increments, keep qualification definitions tight, and keep weekly coaching in place until performance is stable at the new level. Done right, outsourcing becomes a flexible way to add pipeline without inheriting the full burden of hiring, tooling, and the 14-month tenure reality that makes internal calling teams hard to sustain.